Well, thank you, Clarice, and thank you, Dr. Bernanke, for helping to capsulize and frame the history. It is very important. We had some geniuses in our African continental development, and he mentioned Marcus Garvey and Du Bois, and he mentioned Kwame Nkrumah and the Casablanca Conference and how that stood against the Monrovia Conference. And there were two trains of thought that were conflicting, but only slightly. They agreed, Dr. Nkrumah's group and then Dr. Nyeri's group agreed that Pan Africanism was the way forward, but one group felt that we should gradualism was going to be how we would move, and the other was let's move together very collectively and strongly. That was the Casablanca group, and move forward and in a structured Pan African way. And that was back in 1958. 58. So we're talking about a long history of an effort to try and move the Pan-African development of Africa forward as quickly as possible. It's taken a lot longer than I think any of us would have wanted, but we are still in a situation where we do not speak, far from being able to speak with one voice. And it is not that it's in spite of the borders that we have, the colonial borders that were structured, that we are not able to achieve that oneness that Pan-Africanism essentially denotes. It is important that we get to one voice. So the borders need to be removed. We need to work out a situation where politicians that promote borders and anyone at this day and age who is promoting the continued divisions of Africa continentally is doing so for self-promotional, opportunistic reasons. And I think we need to call these people out for who they are. You can't say you're for the development of Africa and the development of African resources and the parceling out of each little section of Africa as if it were your own plantation or your own little sales area so that you have these resources to sell from your particular area. Who does that? No one does that anywhere else in the world. The only place we talk about on the planet these days about parceling out resources, selling everything not only under the ground but above ground, sell all the trees, sell all the water, sell everything out of Africa. Everything is for sale, is on the African continent. We need to understand that you're not going to have anything to live on and breathe on and essentially exist on if you sell everything before you even get to a point of stabilization. We need that stabilization. Africa needs to stabilize. We need to understand that Africa is the center of Pan-African community, and African people around the world are homeless as a result of the divisions that continue under neocolonialism and colonialism, and it's precisely because of borders and those politicians who are in Africa that want to maintain those borders. What is going on in the Sahel right now is, I think, a good barometer and a good indicator of what should happen over the rest of the continent. It started in Southern Africa with the Patriotic Front and the movement to get rid of apartheid in South Africa. It started even earlier in Algeria as it moved to resolve its issues there. But as long as we have this patchwork where we have a liberation in this area, and then we have colonialism still being strengthened in another area, it is always going to creep in cycles, and it's going to come back to destroy what we've been able to liberate and free and to get in a functional, beneficial situation for the Pan African community. So we've got to get consistent. We've got to understand that the borders have to go, and the mentality that says this is my section of Africa, and you stay over here in your section, and I'll sell everything that's in the ground in my section, and you can do what you want. And that kind of division has to stop, and the sooner it stops, the better. We have terrible, terrible conflicts going on the M24 in the Congo, and of course the rapid deployment forces, or the RDF forces in Sudan, are wreaking havoc and causing very serious problems. How do you deal with that from the African Union standpoint? What is the African Union going to do to stop the genocide in Sudan? What are they going to do? What can they do about stopping the murder and the challenges that are going on in the Congo? They cannot do anything unless and until they go back to the formula that was devised by Kwame Nkrumah way back in 1960 and develop what Dr. Naka has mentioned as the All African Peoples Movement, but they also developed at that time an All African Peoples Army. If you can't fight an army, you can't solve a war, you can't solve a conflict unless you have a superior military element that can go in and stop that conflict. What are you going to do? You can only talk about it. You can only essentially cry about it, or give lip service. Africa needs to unite, if for no other reason, for the ability to move within the continent and stop those conflicts that are going on the continent. There have been 22 African heads of state that have been assassinated on the African continent since 1960. And it's generally and usually done by Western countries, elements of the West. They come in and just selectively and just at their will almost come in and destroy African unity as it starts to bud and starts to grow. That tells you that until you are unified from Tunis and Morocco all the way down to Cape, and from the Gambia all the way to the Horn, you need to unite the entire continent. You need to contribute to military forces within the continent to go and stop those conflicts in Sudan and obliterate those conflicts that are going on in Congo. What is going on in the Sahel is, I think, very telling about what should and can happen over the rest of Africa. And as I mentioned before, we started that in Southern Africa, but it has to be consistent. It has to be continent-wide. Otherwise, Europe and elements of the West and outside forces can just drop in, start a war, start a conflict, and cause total mayhem and disrupt those countries that are developing, and give themselves cover to come in and assassinate the Sankaras and the Amilcar Cabrals and disrupt the foundations of what is going on in Ghana, whether it's under Nkrumah, as they did, waiting for him to go to China and Vietnam, and then come in and disrupt what he had built in Ghana. Same thing with Gabon Nasser in Egypt. We have to understand what is going on and how we're being manipulated from the outside to realize the importance of Pan-Africanism and Pan-Africanism from a complete standpoint. The AU is not doing what it needs to do in order to develop that. So it may take a third organization. Maybe the Sahel states have the right idea, form it from there, and allow it to grow and naturally, militarize more of the continent until we can get rid of the people who are really causing this delay in the development of true Pan Africanism. Yes,
Okay.
yes. Um, the problem in Africa is that there's too much emphasis on the trade and on resources. Again, it is a serious, serious problem when you look at the devastation that's going on in Sudan. 500,000 children have been killed in Sudan uh, as recently as that number is actually gone up over the last couple of weeks. And looking forward, you're talking about millions of people who are in the process of fleeing the area, fleeing the region, and essentially just being mobilized and moved about the continent. But more importantly than even that, I mean, the crisis is devastating, and there's no response from the leadership. The leadership of Africa has not responded, whether it be from Madagascar, Kenya, Chad, uh, certainly Mali and Niger and Burkina Faso have shown what young people's response to these crises will manifest. Young people are tired. Young people are always the canaries in the coal mine, so to speak. And I don't think African leadership is paying attention to what African youth are saying. And the African youth are saying, we are tired. We are stressed. At our young age, we are stressed. I don't know what you people who are older than us are thinking, but we are stressed. And that's why they pushed what happened in Mali, and they supported what happened in Niger, and they supported Ibrahim Traore in Burkina Faso to move militarily, to take control of those countries. They're moving in the same way in Ivory Coast. They're being pushed and pressured in Senegal. And we are looking at, again, Chad and the other countries that I mentioned, Kenya, and even as far away as Madagascar. These are things that are unprecedented, and they're being pushed by the youth. We have too many leaders. We have too many countries. There's only 192 countries on the planet, and almost 60 of them are in Africa. Africa is so subdivided, ridiculously subdivided into all of these little splintered countries, and everybody wants to be the person at the table. It is not going to continue to happen, according to the youth. They're going to change that dynamic very quickly. And when you see that dynamic happening, what we saw just in the last couple of weeks coming out of Washington with Donald Trump saying, oh, we're going to go into Nigeria and we're going to liberate Christians in northern Nigeria, and we're going to hit heavy, and it's going to be, a military, devastation. I mean, how dare he make that kind of announcement in the face of a continent that has so much significance and importance to the world, but also is developing its own capacity and is it's in a helpless state right now. Africa has to pull itself out of this helpless state, and we've talked about that this morning and how to do that. They do need to understand and respond militarily. They need to defend themselves, and they can't do it unless they have Pan-African ideals and unless they unify and move along those lines to achieve those things militarily that are going to finally defend and truly liberate the African continent. So I hope that that movement will move along unimpeded, and we get the intellectuals and the elites out of the way in Africa, and we stop trying to divide sub-Saharan Africa from Northern Africa. It's one Africa. It is all and always has been the Africa that we've all known it to be, despite the intrusion of people. Europe wants to take all of North Africa and make it part of Europe. That's the design, the greater Israeli plan, half of Egypt and all of the valley around the Tigris and the Euphrates River, and as well as Libya and Tunis and all the way to Morocco. They envision that being Southern Europe. That's not going to happen. We're not going to allow that to happen. The African youth are not going to stand by and watch that happen. And African intellectuals and these political leaders who want to stand in the way are going to be swept into the dustbin of history, because Africa just will not tolerate the continued problems that it's had over this particularly last 60 years. Sure. Yes, Pan-Africanism is important in that it takes into account the entire African diaspora as well as those who are on the continent. Many of us didn't have a say on when we left Africa or why we left Africa, whether it was through slavery or voyages long time before Europeans understood and started recording their movements around the earth. Africans were already mobile and actually ventured to every part of the world, and that's anthropological history, and we need to reassess those things. But I am as African as any African on the continent. And I think that we need to get away from the separation of Africans who are not part of the continent versus those who are on the continent. And we need to recognize that Pan-Africanism inculcates that fact and that understanding. So Africans on the continent take very possessively their idea of things like resources and trade and those kinds of issues, and they're not yours. The oil that is in Nigeria is not the property of the Nigerians. The gold that's in the Sudan is not just the property of the people of the Sudan. It is the property of all African people where they are throughout the world. And until and unless we get back to a Pan-Africanism that encompasses basic ideas and then uses those same ideas to reinforce what our needs are, we're going to selfishly indulge in these kinds of debates. Get rid of the borders, let the youth and the ideas of the youth come to life, that Africa needs to be one, and we will solve these problems much quicker, and there'll be less conflict on that road and on the way to doing that.